Welcome to Jim Harold Live. I'm Jim Harold. So glad to be with you today to cap off the week. And what a week it has been. My goodness. Really, last weekend, I don't know about you guys, shortly after the live, I almost thought about cranking up the live machine again because, man, was it a surreal weekend. We were out shopping Friday evening, picking up some stuff for the Super Bowl. I guess I should say the big game. I don't want to get sued. And anyway, got this note about this shoot down of this object. And little did we know that was just the beginning of it. So as we're doing the live here and we're doing the news, we're going to do a quick recap. We've got lots of people. Cindy's from Georgia. Mimi is from Eastern PA. Perth, Australia, Warren, just people from all over the globe. And I think people are just fascinated by this UFO topic. So I guess we'll get right to the news right now. And I don't know if you knew, but I've got a bunch of people who are in the background with teletypes. And what they do is they collect the news while, I'm getting ready to do this show. So I just wanted to acknowledge them. So let's go to news story number one. Okay, what I thought would be nice, and I went looking for a story like this, and the New York Times had one, was if we could just do a recap of what's happened in the last week and a half. And this is a nice piece that was written by a gentleman by the name of Derek Bryson Taylor. I thought did a nice job of recapping. So let's go over, shall we, the various shoot downs and so forth. And I think that'll be helpful because it does get confusing at first. So on February 4th, I think that we can all agree that a Chinese spy balloon was shot down. I think everybody has said that is the case other than the Chinese themselves. And would they admit to having a spy balloon? I don't think so. So, okay, February 4th, spy balloon. Some people question, should that have been shot down sooner? Personally, and again, I'm not an intelligence person, hopefully an intelligent person, but not an intelligence person, not a military person, but to the lay person, to me, and this is not political, it's just being honest, I think they should have shot it down over Alaska. I don't think it should have been allowed to go over the United States. But be that as it may, that decision was made, so there you have it. So that was shot down. But then, now this is what happened last Friday, UFO is shot down over Alaska. And, that's just amazing to me. Can you just think about that? And this is one of the first times ever in U.S. history that this has ever happened. I think that something's been shot down over the continental United States. I mean, that is just incredible to me that happened. And, so that was mind-blowing enough. So that's the first incident, and I just lost my story, so bear with me a minute while I pull my story back up. I apologize. I love texting in the middle of a show when family decides to text you. But anyway, the first one was shot down, and that was shocking enough. And then you've got another shoot down, and this one it comes on, let's see, what was that date? February 11th, a UFO, an American F-22 fighter, downed an object over the Yukon Territory in Canada. So that's interesting. I guess the way that worked, because it is NORAD, it was actually Justin Trudeau who ordered the shoot down, I'm assuming. I think there were some consultations with the Americans, of course. It was unclear what the object was, but it had violated Canadian airspace. Now, something I want to mention about the previous day's balloon. Now, this is a quote from the Times article. The object broke into pieces after being shot down and was most likely not a balloon, a Defense Department official said. I think that's important to remember here. February 12th, a UFO was shot down over Lake Huron, an object that first appeared over Montana. That's interesting because if you'll recall, the big bugaboo with the Chinese spy balloon was that it was over nuclear installations in Montana. It reappeared the next day on the 12th before being shot down over Lake Huron over Michigan. The object, which was flying about 20,000 feet, had an octagonal structure with strings hanging off of it, but had no discernible payload. So you've got 4 total shootdowns. And, to me, some of what that article says contradicts with now kind of the line that we'll hear in a minute, the possible explanation. Let's go to a story from Popular Mechanics. And Popular Mechanics says that apparently the first UFO shootdown attempt over Lake Huron was a miss. It was actually a miss. An F-16 fighter pilot missed the first attempt to shoot down a UFO over Lake Huron. This is according to Popular Mechanics. And if you think about it, that is an expensive miss because that is a $400,000 Sidewinder missile. They did get it on the second go-around. And the interesting thing to me is, if this does turn out to be what we're being told now what it is, what a waste of money. Now, some people say, well, why didn't they use their guns that are on those fighters? Much less expensive than a $400,000 missile just being thrown out to nothing. Well, the answer is, some speculate that the massive rounds fired by the aircraft's M61 Vulcan gun might have posed a risk to people on the ground when they fell to earth. So, the thing is that if that's the case, it's worth the $400,000. You certainly don't want to hurt anybody on the ground, and I respect that. But it was interesting that they did miss. Now, here's where it gets interesting. We know President Biden spoke yesterday, and there was talk that maybe this is a research. These 3 objects are research balloons, possibly commercial. And now a hobby club is concerned that one of their hobby balloons was shot down by the U.S. Air Force. A small globetrot, and this is according to Aviation Week, a small globetrotting balloon declared missing in action by an Illinois-based hobbyist club on February 15th has emerged as a candidate to explain one of the 3 mystery objects shot down by 4 heat-seeking missiles launched by the U.S. Air Force fighters since February 10th. This balloon club is called the Northern Illinois Bottle Cap Balloon Brigade. Can you imagine that? They put up a little balloon and we shoot it down with a $400,000 missile. Now, the club's circumstantial evidence, this article at aviationweek.com says it is at least intriguing. The club's silver-coated party-style Pico balloon reported its last position on February 10th at 38,910 feet off of the west coast of Alaska. And supposedly it is a popular forecasting tool. It is the high-split model provided by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And they projected that this cylinder-shaped object would be floating high over the central part of the Yukon Territory on February 11th. So, you know what that means? Maybe they shot it down. And Tom Medlin, a retired FedEx engineer and co-host of the Amateur Radio Roundtable show, says, I'm guessing they were probably Pico balloons. Now, again, is this just a convenient out? Is this just a way for this to be explained away? It is an interesting question. I'm going to tell the teletype guys to cool it a little bit now. But the point is this just a convenient out from the government? Or is this a potentially good explanation? I don't know the answer to it, but hopefully here in a moment we will have someone along who will know the answer to it. I'd be interested in your thoughts on what's going on here. How do we stop them doing the type sounds? Oh, finally. You don't like that? You mean you don't like that we have fun? Doesn't that add something to it? I feel like old school news. We've got some good comments here. We'll get to them. And then we're going to get to our friend Micah Hanks over in the green room, as it were. Gnostic Man says, couldn't have used guns because they would have to get close. So they're going up to 600 miles per hour, and those objects were going with the wind. Would have been too dangerous for the pilots to use guns. Great insight. Better than the insight we got from Popular Mechanics. Very good. Let's see. Android Paranormal says, I don't think any of those objects was their balloon if it looks like the one in their picture. Yeah, they had a picture there, and I don't think that matches up. So what we're going to do now is we're going to bring in our good friend, Mr. Micah Hanks. Mr. Micah Hanks, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Jim Harold. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. I'm getting a little bit of feedback on the line here. A little bit of feedback.
We'll get that all worked out. I think everything is dialed in correctly. Let me know if that continues.
Let's see. No, I'm getting some feedback there, Micah. So I don't know if you can take a look at it and just look how things are routed, and I'll come right back to you.
You got it.
And that's the nature of live streaming. That's really interesting. We didn't have that before. And we do now. Let's see. Yeah, I muted Micah, and let's see if we got it now. Now, let's see. Let's bring Micah back in. Micah, are you there?
I bet it's working now. Try that.
I bet it is. It is working, sir. Thank you so much for taking time and being on the show.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. You know, when you have a multifunctional, multi-purpose studio with audio interfaces, as you and I well know, sometimes you have to tweak those things, and it has to do with mix minuses and stereos and things like that. So I think we've got it all worked out. If it acts
the only thing I would suggest is just bring your level up just a little bit. Just a little bit.
Try that.
Okay, I think that's a little bit better. Well, so good. So good to be with you. I very much appreciate you taking time. I think everybody on here knows who Micah is, but if for some reason you've been under a rock and you don't, Mr. Micah Hanks, that's his website there at micahhanks.com. He is a writer, podcaster, history fanatic, science enthusiast, and philosophy junkie, in his words, and really a good guy. And I couldn't be prouder of what he's done over at the Debrief.org or Debrief.org, I should say. It is a wide-ranging site, as you can see there. Science, tech, space, defense, aerospace, UAP, of course, that's what we're going to talk about today. They have podcasts, newsletter, just going from strength to strength there. Micah, congratulations on everything you've done on the Debrief.
Well, thank you. I hear both versions, by the way. I always said debrief, but then again, I'm from North Carolina. Some folks say debrief. You know, I'm not very particular, but I'm just glad people are looking at the website. We've certainly gotten a lot of traffic in recent days.
Yeah, there's no question about that. I mean, it's been absolutely wild. And the best way I could describe last weekend is the idea of just a surreal situation. I mean, I think many of us kind of went, okay, the Chinese have doubled down here. They're saying, you don't like it? We're going to really throw some things at you. I mean, that's where my mind was, rather than aliens or hobby balloons. Earlier we talked about the possibility now. There's a group out of, I think, Illinois that believes that one of their hobby balloons may have been shot down over Alaska. That they had let out and had drifted away. A lot of things floating out there, a lot of, maybe a lot of BS, maybe a lot of explanations. I guess the first thing I'd like to do is just get your take on what's happened over the last 2 weeks.
Well, I mean, it's without question unprecedented, even if you don't ascribe any kind of unusual nature to the objects. And frankly, I don't. It sounds like you and I are pretty much right in line, especially on the heels of what was once suspected and now officials are saying is a confirmed Chinese spy balloon that was allowed to drift across the United States and its airspace before being shot down right off the Carolina coast. On the heels of that, most of us were looking at these follow-up incidents involving shoot-downs over both U.S. and also Canadian airspace, and they were saying, okay, well, it looks like there is indeed more at work here, Chinese probably, who knows what else. But I think that's where everybody's minds went. What became strange, of course, Jim, is as the information continues to come forward, we, of course, see this last-minute briefing. Both we had, of course, National Security Council advisor John Kirby speaking at the White House. We had Pat Ryder speaking from the Pentagon last Friday, both of them referring to this unequivocally as an object that was shot down over Alaska. That all before, of course, a separate object and an incident involving one occurred over Canadian airspace, and then again another over Lake Huron. And don't forget, of course, that the object that was shot down over Lake Huron was suspected to have been detected on radar over Montana on, I believe, Saturday night last weekend. So as this was all developing, and again, military officials, the Pentagon, essentially just saying, we've shot down objects, we don't know what they are yet, there are recovery efforts underway, we'll keep everybody posted. This naturally gave rise to a whole lot of speculation, because when you start saying unidentified objects shot down over U.S. airspace, we don't know what they are, we're hesitant to call them balloons, naturally people start wondering, what if? Could they be something else? And I got to be honest, even the Debrief team and I, we were looking at the possibility that maybe, if not balloons, these could be some kind of surveillance technologies or other kind of platforms in use by a foreign power. Of course, there's a possibility of drones, perhaps some kind of a drone that is in some ways more simplistic than the kind of drones, quadcopters and things like that we see, or the kinds that the U.S. military uses to carry out remote strikes. Maybe something more simple than that, maybe something that almost combines drones and balloons. But then again, there are also those areas your mind goes to at certain times. What if there's something even more extraordinary here? And of course, most people wouldn't even go there. Jim, I think you and I, we put that on the heels of, or maybe we carry that aloft on the shoulders of a long history, let's say, of unusual objects that have been reported by military, civilians, scientists. This, again, is something that goes back decades. And being a student of the history of the UAP subject, again, I'm always open to possibilities, but I guess where you have to start is what seems most likely. But the most baffling thing to me is that at this point, we still haven't gotten any confirmation. It's been strongly alluded to that these are in likelihood balloons. As I understand it, I believe the search over Lake Huron has been called off, and of course inclement weather even further north up in Alaska has made it far more difficult to recover any debris from the object that was shot down last Friday. But I mean, here we are a week later, and we still don't have any definitive answers. It took almost a week for the President of the United States to finally address this. So it's a really strange situation, and again, a historic one, considering that for the first time, NORAD actually shot down objects over U.S. airspace and Canadian airspace. So that alone makes this historic.
Honestly, one note, technical note, the audience is telling us your audio is still low. So if you could, I don't know if you can boost it by 20 or 30%.
Try that.
We're definitely still not making a difference.
Okay, see if that's any better, Jim.
Now we're getting there. Excellent. And these things happen. I mean, the nature of doing a show like this and bringing people in live, we don't get to test. We're not like CNN. But anyway, now here's a question for you. Why did it take so long? In fact, I was going to bring this up. You wrote this particular article, it just came out yesterday after the president's address, and you said that essentially a lot of people, lawmakers, scientists, are calling for more transparency. Why the reluctance? If it's just simply the most mundane explanation, why the big silence game? I mean, why do we have to not mention what it is?
I think, Jim, that there are several reasons for that. First and foremost, there was a lot of pushback against the Biden administration following what occurred last week with the spy balloon. Specifically, Biden had initially given early orders that when it was safe to do so, to go ahead and shoot that thing down. Of course, he was advised by Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and others, well, maybe we shouldn't rush to judgment on that. Let's allow this thing to get over the water so that it's no longer any kind of a danger to the U.S. And, of course, to the citizenry. Let's make sure that we collect as much intelligence about it as possible. So to me, it did make sense why there was such a slow progress in terms of allowing that balloon to drift and then finally shooting it down over the ocean. But on the heels of that, once we started detecting other objects, and again, the reason for this, as was explained by NORAD General Glenn Van Herk last weekend, in fact, this interrupted the big game. In the middle of the big game, everybody's at home watching, and we get this notification that the Pentagon's making a late night, somewhat impromptu briefing. But Van Herk essentially explained, we've adjusted our radar. The defense radars that we normally use to detect objects in our airspace, we've sort of calibrated those. I think he calls them velocity gates. So basically adjusting those allowed for the detection of more objects, which normally NORAD wants to try and cut out of the data that they're collecting so as to better detect aircraft and other more pertinent potential threats. with the collection of all this data and with the widening of the field, so to speak, of the radar and its capabilities, naturally they began detecting things. And as soon as they felt that there were objects, again, operating within that threshold of about 40,000 feet or lower, which could potentially be a threat to aviators, President Biden said, okay, we're not going to waste any time this time. As long as it's out there over territorial waters of Alaska, go ahead and shoot this first one down. And that's what happened. The reason, in my view, why they never came out and said, okay, here's what they are, is because, A, without being able to conclusively recover that wreckage and know for certain that these were balloons, hobbyist, commercial, benign, all these terms having been used in recent days, whatever they may have been, because they couldn't rule out the possibility that they weren't balloons, they just characterized them as objects, which I think was correct. But again, this gave rise to all this speculation, Jim, and that's kind of the problem. In likelihood, are we looking at hobbyist balloons, pico balloons, in other words, as some have called them? Could they have been other things, atmospheric balloons, part of science projects and things? It's not impossible, but they probably won't know. According to some analysts, they're saying it could be so difficult to recover any wreckage that if they haven't done it by now, they probably never will. And I bet you 30 years from now, if that's the case, people will be talking about this, calling it the new Roswell. What did they really shoot down? They weren't able to recover any wreckage, or at least that's what they told us. So this is probably going to be an ongoing thing.
Well, I understand why, now I see leaking into the mainstream media a lot of talk about people who are interested in UFOs. It's a problem. This is a problem. It's conspiracy theory. It's misinformation. So now all of a sudden, this ufology and the study of UFOs is now being categorized as conspiracy theory. Now, I'm totally willing to believe that these were innocuous balloons, and because essentially the military was on hair trigger, and because the Biden administration, and again, as I said in my opening remarks, not getting political, but I think that the original object should have been shot down over Alaska. I don't think there's any way you knowingly let that go across the United States. Again, I'm a layperson. I'm not a military expert. I'm not intelligence, hopefully intelligent, but not intelligence. My feeling is that should have been shot down. I would have said the same thing with Republican, Democrat. I don't think Bill Clinton, and I don't think John Kennedy, I don't think people like that, Democrats, would have allowed that to go over the country. So it's not a political statement. So this may have been an overreaction to just innocuous, hobbyist commercial aircraft. I'm totally willing to believe that. But my critique is, if you're not transparent with people and you don't say, this is what this is, if it's not a threat to national security, why can't they just say, okay, this is what we think it is? That Illinois group that I talked about, the bottle cap balloon group of Northern Illinois or something, they think it might be one of theirs. Why don't we say, yeah, we kind of think that is. Why can't they just come clean with us within reasonable expectations rather than this doublespeak? And then it lends itself to people saying, yeah, they're probably hiding aliens.
Well, Jim, again, I don't want to get political either, but I think if we're really to understand the dynamics of what are going on here, you're pretty much spot on. It was political pressure, I feel, that was put on the current administration, right or not, in allowing that balloon to drift across the United States, because had it only been detected, let's say, the Tuesday before the Thursday where civilians began to see it, thereafter, of course, the Wall Street Journal reported on this, and then it became a big story, and there had to be a official acknowledgement. The data that we had at that time was that the original Chinese spy balloon, again, the one that was confirmed as being a balloon that everybody saw, it even drifted over my house. I didn't see it, but there were people in my neighborhood who got photographs of it, Jim.
Wow.
So, yeah, so nobody disputes that was a Chinese spy balloon at this point, except for China, who continues to say, of course, that it was a meteorological balloon that we used aggressive force and shot down as it was exiting our airspace. Frankly, look, according to international law, we were well within our right action as the United States, taking action as we did in shooting that thing down. But more recently, it seems that rather than the initial intelligence that we were given that the balloon had been spotted by as early as Tuesday of that week and that intelligence officials were tracking it, Biden had been briefed on it early in the week, I believe NPR and other outlets have now reported that we may have been watching it since the time it was launched in China, and it was watched the entire time it was traveling over into the United States airspace. Now, if that's the truth, there's a problem here, and again, opponents of the administration would say, well, it should have been shot down much sooner. Now, again, some intelligence officials may continue to argue that, well, we wanted to try and get as much information as possible. Keep in mind, they sent up U-2 spy planes to fly alongside it and to collect information, visual and otherwise. it may have actually been strategically more useful to allow that to cross across U.S. airspace the way it did. We don't know. But I see that a lot of people are going to make a political point out of that. And so I don't think that Biden wanted to risk being seen as inactive or ineffective again. And so he maybe perhaps got a little trigger happy and ordered the shoot down of not one, but two. And of course, the U.S. assisted in the shoot down of the other object, the third one over Canadian airspace as well. The problem here, though, is that it took so long to get a statement from the president. So when we reported that yesterday, of course, I reached out to members of an organization I'm associated with, the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies, skeptic Mick West also. And then I quoted several senators who were briefed in a classified briefing on Tuesday. And that's one of the most interesting ones, because those senators who came out of that briefing on Capitol Hill on Tuesday essentially we're all saying the same thing. If you're confused, then you have the right state of mind on this. That, again, Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana. Of course, we had Senator Marco Rubio of Florida, who was saying 99% of what was said in that room should be publicly available. But anyone who thinks that the recent 3 incidents are anything new, having been briefed on this and having followed it for years, Rubio said this is nothing new. This is exactly what the DoD's All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, which is effectively the current UFO investigative group within the DoD. But again, keep in mind, they are not talking about little green men and flying saucers. They are looking at all varieties of aerial threats, and many of them, if not most, currently, according to that recent 2022 annual UAP report they issued in January, they say that the majority are unmanned aerial systems or things like that, balloons or balloon-like objects. And so now we have some additional clarity, I think, on what the wording in that report indicated. But make no mistake, there are still at least several dozen objects that Aero is currently unable to characterize. Basically, they say that these objects, some of them may appear to display advanced capabilities. They may represent technologies that the U.S. doesn't fully understand. They may require, and this was actually said in the 2021 report issued by what was called then the UAP Task Force, they may also require additional advancements in science before the U.S. or anybody will really be able to understand what these represent. Now, you add to that the current intelligence assessments that none, Jim, none of the objects in recent days were suspected of being involved with Chinese surveillance. Now, that doesn't mean, of course, that they are something extraordinary. Much of them, or maybe most, sound like balloons at this point. And again, the White House has used the language benign or commercial to describe leading hypotheses for what these were. But again, Marco Rubio came out of that briefing the other day saying, actually, there are a lot that are far more concerning. This is something that the U.S. intelligence agencies and the military have been dealing with for a long time. And right now, we need more transparency, and the American people deserve to know what's going on.
Well, I want to show you this comment from our friend Ryan Sprague, because this was something I was going to ask you about. Okay. Ryan says they're UAPs until they're shot down. Then they call them UFOs again. Thus, all UFOs moving forward will now be linked to these balloon or spy craft. So I think kind of what Ryan's getting at, and what I was going to ask you was this. Okay. And we've had this discussion. I believe some UFOs are, good people who are mistaken. I think some UFOs are outright hoaxes. I believe many UFOs are military craft of some type. And by the way, I'm getting a little echo from you, Micah. I'm sorry. And then finally, I think there's that category that may be possibly extraterrestrial or interdimensional. And I think what Ryan is getting at, and what I'm concerned, is there's an old saying in politics, never let a good crisis go to waste, right? So you take this situation. Let's say it's totally innocuous and benign. The U.S. got trigger happy, shot down some hobbyist balloons, weather balloons. Okay. Now, the anti-extraterrestrial component of the government, people who don't even want to broach that subject, use that to say every time one of these things come up, it's a weather balloon, it's a weather balloon. So they use it as a justification to kind of eliminate that anomalous category. Do you think that's possible, or do you think I've got my tinfoil hat on firmly?
No, I don't think you have your tinfoil hat on, Jim. There's obviously a lot of confusion because I guess up until around 2017, at least as far as the current dialogue, but I'll actually point to the fact that as early at least as 2015, I was using UAP in various articles that I was writing and essays that I was publishing. There's an article on my website from 2015 that's titled Toward a Better Ufology, but I refer to the, again, UFOs as UAP throughout that. And for one simple reason, I was trying to expand the vocabulary, and also with knowledge of the fact that there are a variety of different things that may be characterized as unidentified aerial phenomena, or as the DoD has recently begun calling them, unidentified anomalous phenomena. And that may not just be structured objects believed to have been of exotic or otherworldly origin. There are a variety of things that should be accounted for. And I was saying in 2015, I mean, we have to look at the possibility of drones, the possibility of weather balloons and other kinds of atmospheric devices, and a whole range of other things, natural phenomena, being characterized and being understood within the context of studying anomalous phenomena observed in our skies. So that was 2015 that I was writing that. You can go on my website and read that article. But in 2017, we began seeing more prolific use of UAP after the DoD, first essentially the Navy, but then thereafter other agencies began using similar wording. Now, again, that was nothing new, and I certainly was not the first person to do that. Again, the National Aviation Reporting Center on Anomalous Phenomena, NARCAP, they've been using UAP for years before that. In the UK, there was again, a very elaborate report that looked into aerial mysteries that also used that and characterized these phenomena as unidentified aerial phenomena. Jim, I found a document, an FBI document going all the way back to the late 1940s that used that expression, unidentified aerial phenomena, in relation to what at that time had not even been called UFOs yet. That wouldn't come along until about 1952 with Edward Ruppelt, the first director of Project Blue Book. And he at that time used UFO so as to have a more ambiguous wording for the wide range of objects that up until that point popularly were known only as flying saucers. But of course, as Ruppelt and others pointed out, they weren't all saucers. They weren't all disc-shaped. In fact, maybe a minority of them in the broader scope of all the things people said they were seeing in the skies at that time were disc or disc-like in appearance. So again, it's been this progression over time of trying to find the right word, how to use them. If you go back even further, 1946 over Scandinavia, when they were calling the anomalous phenomena seen in the skies at that time ghost rockets. Were these things really rockets?
Right.
I highly doubt that. Were any of them something more akin to what we would call a UFO or UAP in modern parlance? Certainly. But it was the parlance of the day. People had on their minds V-2 rockets that had been colliding with buildings and population centers in parts of Britain and other parts of Europe. And of course, at that time, they were going to use terminology that was familiar to them at that time. Now, in recent days, when we've seen the reuse of UFO, this says two things to me. One, that that confusion continues. I think that U.S. officials are still grasping with really what to call these things. President Biden yesterday, during the comments that he offered, I think he said unidentified aerial objects. I think that even at this point, UAP is becoming somewhat stigmatized.
Potato, I say. Just laughing about the changes of the terminology. To some extent, it's like they're talking themselves in circles, because I think they really loathe this whole situation. They're really at a loss. I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's just, I was saying, you say potato, I say potato. They're really just, I think they're a little flummoxed by this one. I do. I want to get to this quick question, and you can continue your thought as well. Sorry to interrupt. Astonishing Legends, our friend Scott and Forrest. Great question here. And I agree with this, and I've been thinking about this. Everyone keeps talking about changing the filtering on the radar monitoring. Whatever these additional objects are, how in the world can this just have been a blind spot in radar observation? And I'm going to throw something out there. The first thing I thought of, I mean, you want to get really scary? I thought about, oh God, I'm blanking on it. EMP attack. I thought about a low altitude weapon that could be exploded over the United States and could cause massive electrical grid issues, even to the point of knocking out the grid in like half the country. And I know that that's something obviously the military has studied, but if they can float a balloon over us that low, like that first Chinese balloon, and get it to Montana, I mean, how much harder would it be to take that next horrible step? So I think to Scott and Forrest's, I think Scott might be at the controls today, to their point, aside from the whole ET possibilities and all that, isn't this just an extremely disturbing thing about our national security? If all these small objects are literally flying under the radar and could have been here for years? I mean, what are your thoughts?
It is disturbing, Jim. I think, again, we have to take into consideration that, yes, there were some who were saying that initial Chinese spy balloon that was transiting U.S. airspace was at the right altitude for the potential delivery of a electromagnetic pulse weapon. That's what an EMP is. How this essentially would work would be that you would detonate a nuclear device at altitude above the United States, possibly even within space. The resulting electromagnetic shock wave emanating downward wouldn't actually affect people in terms of, causing devastation to life directly. What would happen is it would knock out the electrical grid.
Right.
And the end result would be that people wouldn't have power. So, think of all the different systems that we rely on electricity for. Widespread power outages could take us back at least temporarily into the dark ages. And some have argued that that might be more effective as an attack against the U.S. Than actually launching a weapon directly at civilian land. So, that's a concern. I don't know that that was ever a realistic threat, but many people were pointing that out about the Chinese balloon in terms of that being a potential delivery mechanism for such a weapon. That's where that discussion is. To Scott and Forrest's point there from our friends at Astonishing Legends, how is it that these things weren't detectable beforehand? Well, again, as General Van Herk had said last weekend, it had been an intentional effort to expand the sensitivity of NORAD's radar, defense radars. And they did this again, adjusting those velocity gates, because previously small things like balloons, birds, atmospheric phenomena, slower moving objects, these kind of things were intentionally filtered out because they didn't behave like aircraft or the kinds of things you would expect would be a direct threat to U.S. airspace and, of course, to the American way of life. So by expanding that and the apparent obvious choice in doing so in response to the Chinese spy balloon, it seems that now we are detecting a whole lot more things. What's also really interesting is that presumably there were probably ongoing detections, but none of those things have been shot down. There were all these sudden shoot downs right within about a 48-hour period. That to me says a lot. That to me says that there was a little bit of a concern. People were being trigger happy, especially the President of the United States, I think, who both at once didn't want to take any chances. And again, keep in mind yesterday he said he is unapologetic. He will shoot down anything that he thinks may represent a threat to our airspace, commercial or otherwise. But also, I think he was concerned about what his opponents politically might say if he didn't take action and if it were found out that indeed objects were detected and he did nothing. So let's admit the president was in a tight spot. And of course, now there are people around the world, other nations who are kind of looking at the United States and saying, what exactly are you guys doing? What are you shooting down? Is there really a threat, or was this a false alarm? It may be a bit of both. I think it's probably that there was an overreaction to perceived threats. But let's not forget, of course, that where these objects were detected at that altitude, they were potentially a threat to aircraft. I think that one of the examples we heard in recent days, Marco Rubio again, I think had said this one, is that if a vulture, if a bird or something, collides with an aircraft, it can cause significant damage.
Sure.
It can dent the radome. If it were to be absorbed by one of the engines, it could potentially take that out, and it could cause a whole lot of problems for that aircraft. So we have to be aware of any kinds of potential threat in our airspace. So again, I think it's a bit of both. There was the real threat mitigation issue, and you pair that also with maybe a bit of overreaction, but it's an unprecedented case, really. I don't remember anything like this in history, Jim.
No, again, I remember walking through a store Friday night, and I felt just surreal. It just felt surreal, like something out of a movie, especially the texts from CNN and AP and all these coming through with the notifications of the shoot down. A couple of things. First of all, to your point about seemingly innocuous things being able to cause major damage. I remember in the 80s here in the Cleveland area, the Thunderbirds, the U.S. Air Force Thunderbirds flight team was here. And unfortunately, one or more of them lost their lives because they sucked a seagull or something in their engines and caused a crash. It's just horrible. I think it was after the air show was over, they were headed back home and this happened, just because it's right there on Lake Erie. Now, here's something that I've not heard this, talk about tinfoil hat. I've not heard this theory, but I want to put this out here. It kind of is a follow-on to your question about maybe the administration getting a little more trigger happy. Now, Richard Nixon was known for something called the madman theory. And the madman theory was that he wanted to appear so crazy to the Soviets and so unpredictable that they wouldn't try anything because they thought he would be just crazy enough to launch a nuclear attack. So, okay, you have this situation with the Chinese balloon, okay, the first one, the spy balloon. And I I feel that the U.S. came off as looking weak internationally. Whether you agree with it or think, hey, that was the right thing to do to get intelligence and protect people on the ground, I still think it looked weak. So perhaps this whole thing was like a psyop against the Chinese and any other powers that might think, oh, we can do anything we want to the United States. What better way to counteract that than to shoot multiple objects down, warranted or not, over 3 or 4 days to say, oh, well, they're on guard now. We better not try our chances. What do you think about that crazy theory coming from the mind of Jim Harold?
Jim, I don't think it's crazy. We should also remember that in addition to any speculations about the madman theory, Richard Nixon was also known for being very good at foreign policy. He was quite the diplomat. John Kennedy, going back a little further, though, had always said, walk tall and carry a big stick. It's not that you want to directly engage with your enemy, but you want to let your enemy know that you are armed and that you're dangerous if there's ever a threat coming from them. And I think that certainly that's one interpretation of the U.S.'s current actions. And we could probably think about other administrations where maybe our enemies would be less likely to take action based on not so much a respect for a particular leader as it would be just uncertainty about how they would react. So I think that in Biden's case, obviously with the spy balloon, I think you're right. Sometimes the most intelligent response to a situation, and I'm talking about this in terms of the intelligence community and any attempts they may have made to collect data on that spy balloon as it was transiting the U.S. while protecting U.S. lives, preventing it from falling over a civilian area. I think that that's obviously a serious concern, considering that the payload on that balloon was about 3 school bus lengths. So, I mean, it was very large, potentially very destructive if that fell from 60,000 feet and collided with an urban center. That's something that's a no-brainer to me. But indeed, if the intelligence community saw more benefit in collecting data on that and assessing its surveillance capabilities, and perhaps doing so in ways that wouldn't be capable of being done after it has collided with the ground or the ocean, of course, that doesn't seem like a very strong action, like a very offensive posture by the administration. So yet again, you got to catch 22, and maybe the only response thereafter is, okay, we detected this one, we watched it, we called you out, China, but now we're going to show you what we can do and what we will do if this ever happens again. So don't push your luck.
So what are we, in your view, what are we missing here? Is there something that we as folks who are interested in this and following it, is there something that everyone is missing or most people are missing that you'd like to say, hey, make sure you're paying attention to this?
Yeah, here's what people are missing. Again, a lot of folks in recent days after these incidents have gone online and said, well, given the fact that a lot of these incidents now belong to the balloon category or are suspected of belonging to the balloon category, and it's shown that the United States sometimes overreacts in response to simple prosaic things like balloons, let's look back in time and see how many other UFO incidents might also have involved balloons. Over at the debrief.org this morning, we published an op-ed by Alex Ann Dietrich, who was one of the witnesses to the USS Nimitz incident of 2004. She, Commander Dave Fravor, and others observed an object that was roughly the size of a fighter jet. It was capable of advanced dynamic movement very quickly. Didn't seem to be hindered by the laws of gravity, the laws of physics as we know them. This object, again, the so-called Tic Tac, was very unlike anything that the U.S. military has in its arsenal, nor had ever encountered, I guess, before. Although there are some incidents in UFO literature that describe remarkably similar objects, yet again going all the way back to the late 1940s. But I bring up Ann Dietrich's article, her op-ed that she published with us this morning, and thank you to Tim McMillan for helping make that happen, because we have to remember that there are military personnel who have had encounters with objects, aerial objects, that seem to be far more capable of advanced maneuverability. They don't seem to show any kind of discernible propulsion system. They don't act like balloons, nor do they resemble balloons. And these are the kind of UAP that many proponents of the study of that phenomena are saying we must. I mean, it's incumbent upon us to understand these and to know how better to deal with these, how to collect information about them and assess any capabilities they might have, whatever intentions they might have, all these unanswered questions about what many would call genuine UAP. So, Jim, I think that's what people are missing. A lot of people see what happened in recent days and they say, these were balloons, so why weren't all those things balloons? I think that is a reductionist viewpoint, and we have to look at the better cases. Even if there isn't good data that's been collected in some of those instances, that's what's really unique about the Nimitz case. We had, of course, infrared footage that was collected by one of the weapons systems operators or officers rather at that time, Chad Underwood. He's now a commander, but at the time he was the Wizzo on one of those FA-18 Super Hornets. He was able to cycle through and collect a lot of information visually while tracking that using the ATFLIR targeting pod, which is one of the most advanced tracking capabilities made by Raytheon and currently in the possession of our military. We had that. There was radar information, but that of course wasn't released. But then again, there's the eyewitness testimony. So I mean, you had this kind of perfect storm of the visual, the technological, and also the eyewitness information that was gleaned and that was brought forward. And then there have been additional technical analyses, again, some on the skeptical side of the equation, like Mick West have done that. My colleagues at the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies produced a lengthy report on that incident. So bottom line, I think that we should really exercise caution in observing what happened in recent days and saying, okay, well, these were balloons, so a lot of these things probably were too. That may be true. I don't think that extends to all the UAP cases. And in the better instances, it seems evident to me we're dealing with something that's technological in origin, something that is far beyond the capabilities of the U.S. military, and something that currently I don't think we have enough data to make any kind of firm conclusions about its nature or origins. That's an issue the U.S. government and also the scientific community should be taking very seriously.
Now, the title of this video this week was "What in the Hell is Going On with UFO Shootdowns?" And you understand the distinction, what in the hell is going on? So, in short, do you believe what in the hell is going on with these UFO shootdowns? Obviously, the first was the Chinese balloon, spy balloon, we know that. And you think that the following three, if you had to put your money on it, were innocuous commercial hobbyist type balloons, research balloons. Is that where you're falling down on this right now?
That is where I'm falling down. I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but we could speculate that there may be more intelligence that is supporting the idea that those three objects shot down were innocuous, but that the Biden administration and the U.S. military are not saying that for a variety of reasons. Again, this is speculation on my part, but it may be that they don't want to appear like they were wrong or trigger happy. It may be that they knew that these were innocuous devices, but again, going to your madman point, they saw strategic advantage in shooting them down and the message this would convey to our adversaries around the world. So it may have been that was part of the reason. Again, they have stated that these objects were operating within an altitude that made them a potential threat to aviation. So there seems to have been a clear rationale for why they were taken down. Whether or not people see that as, overtly aggressive or unnecessary action on part of the U.S. But based on all the intelligence that we have and putting all that speculation aside, I think that the best explanation right now is that these probably were, as the White House has already alluded, benign or commercial objects, but we don't know. We don't know if they're balloons for certain. We may never know if the objects and any debris related to those takedowns is unable to be recovered going forward. And right now, I think, again, that they've already shut down the operation over Lake Huron. They haven't said that they've recovered anything over the Alaskan coast. I think that the rugged terrain where the Canadian object is believed to have fallen, a suspected Pico balloon, mind you, but these are also, they say, probably unrecoverable debris or wreckage remains from that object. So we may never know conclusively, but going with the best data we have, yeah, I fall pretty squarely on these were probably balloons. Why they were shot down and if there was any kind of ulterior motive or message intended to be conveyed, that remains in the realm of speculation.
Now, Peak Serenity had a point which is similar to what I think Ryan and me were saying. Maybe they're trying to show the public UFOs are just balloons, so now everything is just a balloon. So my question is, do you think, I mean, it felt like with people like Marco Rubio and Kristen Gillibrand, bipartisan, a Republican and a Democrat, and other people in Congress, that there were people really interested in getting to the bottom of this, not just the ones that were explicable via mainstream conventional means, but also these anomalous ones that kind of the TikTok style sightings, things that don't fall easily into a category, that we were going to pursue this strongly. Do you think this event, which may be totally disconnected from any of that, do you think that basically it's going to derail what some people felt was going to be a real investigation into the whole of the UFO UAP phenomenon?
I think that there are some people who are hoping that that's going to be the result. I think that there are certain people who are advocates of the idea that there is no reality in terms of there being extraordinary objects that the military has encountered that may point to, again, seemingly impossible objects that might not be of earthly origin, or at least easily accounted for in terms of known earthly technologies. I think that there are a lot of people who are rooting in this instance for that and saying, the U.S. taking down balloons shows just how ineffective we are, just how human we are. It shows our flaws and our inability to easily discern simple objects, and it shows how quickly we may take military action against these perceived threats, which turn out to be balloons. There are a lot of people who want that to be the narrative. I think we have to recall the statements that some intelligence officials have issued in recent days along the lines of, and this was actually reported, I think, first in the New Yorker in that article by Gideon Lewis Krauss, where an unnamed intelligence official, one whom I later actually spoke with off the record as well, and we had a conversation about this, but that intelligence official said at that time, if some of the skeptics had access to the information that the military has collected about this and that's been under the purview of the past UAP task force and now the current All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, they might be a little less quick to conclude that all these objects have simple prosaic explanations. I have asked some of these intelligence officials, and again, a lot of these people are now no longer in government and they've gone to work in private industry, but they're still bound, of course, to the oaths that they made during their tenure in government. They're not going to talk about classified information with me, with reporters like Tim McMillan, MJ Banias, or any of the Debrief team, but when we do speak with these people and with regard to what information they can share and with regard to what they know, many have conveyed, and they do this very frequently, that there's a lot of good data that strongly suggests that we don't completely fully understand all the nature of the UAP that the military is trying to get a grip on. And also look at the New York Times. In recent days, Julian Barnes and Ed Wong, I believe, and then Helene Cooper, the longtime Pentagon correspondent there with the New York Times, they've kind of changed their tone. In 2017, there was a whole lot of, what many would view as pro-UAP reporting. Again, one of those reporters, investigative reporter Leslie Kane, who I spoke with about all this in recent days too. Mm-hmm. You look at the more old guard reporters up there at the New York Times who are a lot more skeptical toward this, like Julian Barnes is, but even they in the recent articles have been saying, look, the classified report on UAP that was delivered to Congress does still describe at least a minority of objects that are within the purview of what AARO is looking at that seem to display advanced capabilities that the U.S. does not currently understand and which cannot be identified in terms of our known technologies. Now that gets a whole lot less press than most of these things are aerial trash balloons and clutter and things like that, which appears in that first paragraph of those articles. You got to read a little deeper. A lot of people obviously don't, but I think that that's the message here that must not be forgotten. There clearly are objects that the DoD is still evaluating that we can't easily explain. I think if skeptics had access to the information that intelligence officials have had access to in the past, they might see this situation as a little bit more complex than they've made it out to be. And lastly, I'll just say too, here's the pen. Where is it? There we go. Yeah. I have recently become a member of an organization that David Marler has spearheaded called the National UFO Historical Records Center. I was out there in greater Albuquerque in recent days with David at the Records Center, going through documents, Jim, looking at actual Blue Book reports that had the red felt tip marker handwriting of J. Allen Hynek on them, and going through some of the classic cases. Delphos in Kansas, Socorro. And by the way, David and I went to the landing site of the alleged Socorro object back in 1964, seen by police officer Lonnie Zamora. When you go through these documents and you look at the history of this topic, I find it very hard to say that these are all modern technologies, that these are all things that the Navy's testing on its own fleet, that the UAP issue wasn't real until about 2004, and then, of course, it gets reported in 2017 about these incidents, and now there are real UAP, but they're all ours. No, I say that students of the history of this know better, and that this is a phenomenon we've been trying to grapple with and understand now for decades. That effort continues, and I have no doubt, based on what I've heard, that the intelligence community still sees a few of these incidents as being very much unexplained and involving technological objects of unknown origin.
Well, there you have it. Micah Hanks has been our guest. Micah, thank you so much for everything. I want everybody to check out, of course, we talked about micahhanks.com and also, of course, The Debrief, your fantastic site that you co-founded. Talk to people about both and what they can expect to find there.
Well, first of all, let me just thank you, Jim. Ladies and gentlemen at home, Jim and I have been friends for many years. In fact, I look forward to seeing you here in just a few weeks as you and I set sail and take to the high seas together for an event that we're doing at sea. But it's always a pleasure to join you. I always appreciate your kind of old school broadcast sensibilities, which I have as well. And it's great to be able to talk with one of the true pros in the field. But that said, buddy of mine though you are, I have a lot of respect and I appreciate the kind words. You can find me online at micahhanks.com and at thedebrief.org. I'm on Twitter at Micah Hanks, pretty much my name, anywhere you want to look for it. And again, I want to just commend my team in recent days with all this madness that's been ensuing in U.S. airspace. Tim McMillan, MJ Benias, Chris Plain, Chrissy Newton, and others who work a little more behind the scenes, but nonetheless aid in our efforts. We have an excellent team, and I'm very proud of all of them.
Well, Micah, it's always a pleasure. So good to have you on the show, and thank you for taking time today.
Indeed, my pleasure. Let's do it again sooner rather than later, okay?
I agree. Well, Mr. Micah Hanks, he's always fascinating, and we're always so glad to get a chance to talk with him. You know, he was so great to do the Paranormal Report with and really enjoyed doing that and hopefully reviving a little bit of the spirit of that here. And thank you all for joining us. So we have a couple more things for you. First of all, I'll tell you the question of the day. Do you think the balloon explanation for all of these UAP situations, is it, aside from the first one, which we know is a spy balloon, but the last three, are they just simply balloons or BS? In other words, BS being there's something else. So is it a balloon or are the balloon explanations BS? Put your comments down in there and we'll display some of them. Again, is it a balloon? Are they balloons? Or is that explanation total BS? So anyway, I've got something else I want to show you. I love to have a little fun sometimes. And I just took a picture of the spooky studio because we got some new shelving and I think it's looking better than ever. And one of our Facebook people did this. So that's today's funny. I might start doing a funny every week, the funny of the week. So they decided to make me a mountain man and give me long hair and a beard. And by the way, Dar absolutely despises this look. So the question is to you, do you like the beard or no? Should I try to grow out and look like this or should I stick with plain old Jim? There you have it. And so far, I mean, we've got some people. We've got BS. Test of public's reaction to UFO in the headlines. BS. Jake says balloons. Gnostic Man 00 says a combination of balloons and BS. I think that's a good answer. I think I'm with your answer. Let's see here. Let's take a look here. Oh, by the way, super sticker, JJL. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
You're super duper.
Thank you so much for doing that. And you give us a chance to play with our buttons over here. The Dakota says this all feels like a big distraction talking about the balloons. AP says, no, not all three are balloons. BS, likely not ET, but BS. Let's see here. Oh, we've got some feedback on the beard. We'll bring back the beard. Let's see. Okay, let's see what the different things here. Tony says, I think you look fantastic as a mountain man. Thank you. Let's see. Jake says, the dude. We have some. So, oh, Jim, you're so ruggedly handsome. Wendy loves it. She says, I look like Jason Momoa. Nancy says, go for the look. Joy is with Dar, who, you know, Dar has the most important vote. Stick with plain old Jim, laughing out loud. Let's see. Get a beard. Dar doesn't control you. Uh-oh, we have fun. Uh-oh. Actually, she said she would like the beard, but the hair. She doesn't like the long locks. Let's see. Back to our balloon question, balloons. So anyway, there you have it. Now we're going to do our campfire story of the week. This one is going to be to do with the sky. I hope you enjoy it. This is the campfire story of the week from True Ghost Stories, Jim Harold's Campfire, Volume 2. It's called Castle in the Sky. This is from Lisa in Indiana. This is a short story, but one that was very memorable. I don't think I've ever heard anyone else mention anything like it. This was about 30 years ago, and I was with my family at Daytona Beach on vacation. My dad, brother, and I were just walking on the beach. No big deal. It was late afternoon. We just had arrived at the place we were staying, and we were looking around. There were all kinds of clouds out over the ocean, and we were talking about how pretty they were. Well, I looked up, and one of those clouds looked like a castle. And I don't mean, oh, that looks like a bunny. It looked like a real castle made of clouds. So this young woman looked up and saw a real castle made of clouds. She said, I could see every brick. I could see the chains on the drawbridge. I could see the shape of the windows. It was amazing. I didn't know what I was seeing. And the thing of it was, my brother asked, do you see that? I said, heck yeah, I see that. What is it? We stood there and looked at it for a long time. My dad didn't really act like he saw it. My brother and I just stood there with our mouths hanging open for a little while. Then we just kind of went on about our business. I thought about that a lot over the years. My brother remembers it too. It was beautiful. And I don't know what it was that we were seeing or why we may have been seeing it. But it was definitely different. I wonder if anyone else has ever experienced anything like that. And that is Lisa from Indiana. And I hope you enjoyed it. And our campfire cam. We did that a couple years ago. People seem to like it. And AP says that they like it. And We Have Fun said, can we get multiple campfires on the call? I don't have one queued up today, We Have Fun, but maybe we can do that. So I like this. Baby, you're the best. And by your comment, you obviously are. Jim Harold, Micah Hanks, and Astonishing Legends on a Friday. I'm becoming a paranormal nerd. Thanks, guys. Well, thank you for tuning in. And I hope that everybody has enjoyed this little event and enjoyed our little fun with the beard man there. A lot of fun. A great show. We had a good time. We'll be back next time with another Jim Harold Live. Thank you for tuning in. Also, if you like the campfire, one last thing. You can get a free ebook, a PDF download of my 10 favorite stories from the books. So they're older stories, but they're really good. 10 favorite stories. It's a PDF, totally free to you. All you have to do is go over to jimharold.com, click on the big orange button at the top, and sign up for my free email newsletter. And that'll give you updates every week on the shows and so forth. And that is my little gift to you. So that is over at jimharold.com, and click on the orange button and get a free ebook by signing up to my email newsletter. I hope you'll do it. I thank you so much. We'll talk to you next time, and have a great week, everybody. I hope you stay safe, and as always, stay spooky. Bye-bye.